So we are recording the session at the moment, and I'm muting everybody, and we are starting. And again, if you have a question, please type it into the chat window. I'll be watching the chat window and unmute if you have a question. Thank you. So the reason why we are having this webinar is to inform the community of the recent changes in the Lustre ecosystem. So welcome to our Lustre file system capability transition webinar. This is organized by OpenSFS, and thanks to DDN for participating in this call. We have two invited speakers, Peter Jones, Director of Engineering, DDN Whamcloud Division, and Robert Trindle, Senior Vice President from DDN. Peter, Roberts, thank you for attending. And I would also like to extend my thanks to Ken Rawlings for shepherding this effort and putting all of this together. Next slide, please. So again, we are going to be focusing on the transfer of Lustre assets and capabilities from Intel to DDN and how it will affect us and what DDN's plans are about that. We will start with a brief OpenSFS and Lustre community update, and then we will take it from that point on. Next slide, please. So, OpenSFS in a very brief snapshot. What we are trying to do is we are trying to bring the vendors and the members together. The users are named as members and the vendors are participants in our community under the OpenSFS umbrella. As you all know, OpenSFS is user-controlled and user-driven, although we listen and value our vendors' feedback and input quite heavily. What we are trying to do is we are trying to promote Lustre and engage our users, establish a bridge between our users and our vendors. While doing so, we are trying to stay vendor neutral, open, and promote a healthy Lustre ecosystem. We also organize Lustre Users Group Conference, as you know. Every spring we have a user group conference. We have been very successful in this endeavor, and the next one will be coming up this spring as well. I hope you got the notifications. One thing we don't do is we don't fund Lustre development as we did in the past. We are no longer in that business, but we are trying to shepherd individual development efforts from the users and try to organize that information and relay that to the vendors in terms of feature requests and enhancement requests. We had completed the first round of that effort, and Cray has been a participant in that one heavily and provided us their feedback on the user feature and enhancement requests. So I thank them all. Next slide, please. So this is the current list of our OpenSFS supporters. The left-hand side shows the members, right-hand side shows the vendors. So we are growing. You can see there are oil and gas, large-scale HPC clusters, and some academia over there. So we have a healthy representation. And from the vendor side, you see HPC vendors, storage vendors. So we are growing, and this is getting healthier by the day. Next slide, please. So this is a brief history of Lustre and what has happened. As you can see, we have come a long ways since early 2000s when Lustre was developed under the cluster CFS, or CFS in short. We have come a long way since then. Lustre has been undergoing transitions over the time, from CFS to Sun, Sun to Oracle. And then we had the turmoil starting in 2010, which have promoted the establishment of OpenSFS. And since then, as you can see, there is relative tranquility, and OpenSFS has been a presence throughout that time. Lustre has made a few more transitions since then. Whamcloud became Intel, and then Whamcloud also is not shown on this diagram, but there was a separate branch which became Seagate, and then following on Cray. But one thing, as I said, there is a constant, and that constant is OpenSFS. We have been around for last 8 years, providing a common platform for users and vendors, and we will continue to do so. So we are in a relative stability period, and we will hear now DDN's plans on what their plans about the transition of Lustre capabilities and assets. With that, I am going to unmute Peter Jones and let him carry on.
I think Robert will actually talk to the next few slides.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay. So thanks, Sarp, for the introduction. Thanks to OpenSFS. I think you know what was just said, which is to say that you know, Lustre has been around for quite a long time. We see OpenSFS as what it really is, which is the Lustre user organization, or the Lustre user community, and the Lustre development team. I think those things have remained relatively constant, independent of the specific home for the development team. There is, of course, you know, there are reasons why we on the DDN side have made this decision. One simple reason was that we always had a Lustre activity. We have invested more. We did see a bit of a need to ensure that Lustre team has a continuing home. You know, we probably also saw a bit of a need to make sure that the Lustre focus is you know, goes all the way from the high-end now exascale project to the commercial world, to, you know, small systems and universities, which kind of for us is an important market, and to ensure that Lustre within that world remains relevant and takes into consideration sort of that broad market that exists today. Now, in terms of clarification, what happened in June was that essentially the Lustre the core development team has transitioned to DDN, and we have closed this acquisition in middle of June. A couple of weeks later, I think all of the infrastructure elements, you know, Jira, etc., all of that has been, give or take, restored to its prior shape at Intel. There is an important team that remains at Intel that is separate from Lustre, but has some relations to the Lustre team. That is the Deos team. So the Deos team remains at Intel. That was not part of this acquisition in terms of clarification. I think we are continuing to work together with the Deos team. There is a couple of projects that have been laid out. Jean Lombardi gave a presentation about the details of that at the LAD conference last week. So if you're interested in what is brewing between Lustre and Deos, you can look that up. So give or take that is where we are from an acquisition perspective. Next slide. So as I said, Whamcloud at DDN, we have sort of finalized all of the transition. It is a business unit today that doesn't quite yet have its own sales force, but the person who is working on processing support contracts. It is a team that will have its own independent P&L. It is not an independent company right now, but the division, but everything is set up in a way that it can be spun off as a separate entity, and it may become that. We haven't made that choice for now, simply because of the complexity. So the Lustre team is a fairly international team with developers in many countries like Russia, China, etc. So for now, we have kept the team within the DDN sort of corporate umbrella. But as I said, it is essentially a separate team that has its own mind, its own decision-making capability. And all of the resources, as I said earlier, that had been available to the community are available again. All of that transition has happened in a relatively seamless fashion. There was a couple of hours of downtime, and there may have been a couple of days when the website was slow, but I think all of that is finished by now. Next slide. So a very important point, of course, is around the Lustre source tree. So DDN has committed to continue to support this activity. The Lustre source tree, of course, will remain open. There is no other option. And there is a very strong desire on our side, both within the Lustre team as well as at DDN in general, to keep the source tree a single source tree with no major branches, maybe minor branches that have their own specific areas, but essentially we do want to keep Lustre a single source tree without any major branches. That is a commitment. I'll add to that we also want to be very clear with the community that we are not, we are committed to open source in a fundamental way, so we are not going to hold back patches or things. So everything that is done in the source tree will remain open and will become open immediately. And the ambition that we have really is to make that open source distribution the major Lustre distribution and not have any separate DDN distribution or do something special that is available only to a certain set of customers. No, to the contrary, we would like to ensure that end users deal essentially with one Lustre distribution independent of the specific storage hardware or overall system environment that is being used. especially at larger customers, we recognize that end users have often multiple Lustre systems from multiple vendors. We really want to make things simple for end users, so that there are no constraints that say, hey, I have this system from vendor A, so I need Lustre client A, and I have this system from vendor B, so I also need Lustre client B. I think our ambition is to make things as simple as anyhow possible with one single Lustre distribution, and we do believe that Lustre is absolutely mature enough to support that vision. Next slide. So with that, I will hand over to Peter Jones. We'll walk you a bit through the details around releases and plans. And I think if there are any questions around DDN's approach, position, I'll be glad to answer them either now or later in the call.
Okay. So thank you, Robert. So going forward with our release plans, so our intention is to continue to operate in the community-focused development way that we have under the OpenSFS umbrella through the Lustre Working Group. So, we have regular meetings there and work out between development efforts occurring at different organizations, what we will do in terms of content for the various releases. And so we certainly at the moment, we have the 2.12 release we're just trying to finalize. So our current thinking is, we were hoping to have that out. The target was for the end of this month. And I think we're still trending fairly well on that goal. Probably will slip at least into November slightly, but hopefully by supercomputing, the release should either be out or very close to out, the way things are looking right now. And given that we've had some slight disruption due to our development infrastructure being relocated during that time, I think that's pretty good going. And then in that forum over the coming weeks, we will be looking to move out the roadmap and looking at development that people have in flight and where it's likely to land for the releases into 2019. And then the other major decision we have is around the LTS releases. So currently we have the 2.10 as the LTS branch, and we had said at the time of the launch of that we would hold with that branch for at least 18 months. And so that period of minimum will expire early, in January of 2019. So we will be wanting to, consciously holding off to sort of be able to make the most informed decision we could. But again, in the LWG forum, we'll be having discussions and looking at our options for, when we would shift to a more current release to have as our next LTS branch. And also, we'll have some reasonable overlap period where we'll have two LTS branches. So, we're not in a position that suddenly, some newer release that isn't as well proven is the only option. If you want to get updates, we'll have some reasonable overlap while we, transition through that into the newer LTS release. And so again, we'd hope by supercomputing to have clarity there. So there will be, as I think in a later slide, talk about community events there at supercomputing. And so definitely by that forum, we'll have that news, and we'll obviously put that on general circulation as well as we've formalized that decision. So I think we can move on now. So basically, I know there's interest into what our plans are. So I think it's fair to say that, DDN brings some more focused input into, working with end users, has a lot of experience with Lustre solutions. And so, we're definitely having good input there in terms of where our engineering efforts best expended. So we're definitely still, Lustre has really come a long way in terms of its feature set and its capabilities, and we're looking to, how we can extend that further in terms of making it easier to use for people. We're also looking at, as people are introducing more and more flash rather than hard disks into their deployments, what does that look like? And also into the cloud sort of environment and the intersection between on-prem deployments and cloud deployments. So again, I think we'll be starting to see the output from that coming forward, by sort of supercomputing timeframe, how that will start shaping the further out into the roadmap as we sort of realign the plans. But that's about it at the moment. I think we'll move on to the next slide. Back to OpenSFS.
Robert, Peter, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining to this call, and I'm sure there will be questions from the community. So thank you for your time. So one thing I want to mention, OpenSFS is you. It represents everybody around this call and many others. It's not a detached organization. It's just you. It's me, Peter, Alex, Charlie, whoever is on the call. This is us. And this is us working together to keep Lustre alive, keep Lustre healthy, and make sure Lustre is fitting to our needs today, and it will be viable to fit our needs for tomorrow. We are trying to do this in a vendor-neutral, user-driven, user-controlled form. So this is something new that we have been trying, not the vendor-neutral parts. We have been trying that since 2010, but being user-driven and user-control is something we have been trying for the last 2 years. Steve Sims is on the call, so I want to extend thanks to him. So tell us if we are doing something correct or wrong. That being said, from the OpenSFS perspective, and keep in mind that we are vendor neutral, so far we haven't seen any disruption or anything negative with the transfer of Lustre assets and capabilities from Intel to DDN. So I want to thank to DDN for keeping this open and accessible to the community. But it is business as usual since the transfer. So this is good. This is the message I wanted to get out. There had been times of turmoil in the past. We are not seeing any of that right now. Next slide, please. So with that, I want to put a plug for multiple things. There was the LED conference last week in Europe. So thanks for everybody who attended that. It has been organized by our sister organization, EOFS. So if you are from Europe, I strongly advise you to attend LED. LED and LOG are working in a TikTok type schedule. We have ours in spring and they have theirs in fall. There are 2 other community events coming up this month, one in China and one in Japan. You can see the links for there. They are listed as Intel events, but Whamcloud is heavily participating or driving them, as I understand. One last thing I'll mention is we will have our Birds of Feather at the Supercomputing 18 It has been approved. It's on the public schedule. So if you will be at SC, please swing by. It will be on Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. You can find the details if you click that link. So we are trying to gather the whole community by these bird of feather events at SC, and we have been doing this since last 8 years or so. They have been very successful, so if you'll be at SC, please swing by, stop by. We are trying to organize a get-together event in form of a lunch after the BAF. I'll see what we can do about that, but we'll sit down and talk and see where we are, where we need to go. So again, stop by if you are there. Next slide, please. So this is all we have, and it's time for questions. If you look at the chat, Peter Bojanic from Cray has already put in 2 questions. Peter, I can unmute you and you can read the questions.
Yeah, I saw the question. I was anticipating answering.
I was talking to Bojanic actually for a second. Bojanic, do you want to read your questions yourself, or do you want to add anything? I can unmute you, or you can do it yourself if I'm not mistaken. You are unmuted, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Cool. Well, first of all, I don't think we've actually had the opportunity to talk since all of this went down. So congratulations, Robert and Peter, and to the entire team at Whamcloud. I know that making those types of transitions can be challenging, and I think we hardly noticed when it was going on. So thanks very much.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm curious about Whamcloud's plans regarding Lustre and ZFS. So, we're interested in D-RAID, but in general, even the perspective on the future of Lustre with respect to ZFS and
yeah, I mean, specifically with D-RAID, I think there's good news there. It's, it'd been held up for a long time with a prerequisite feature. Metadata allocation class needed to land before D-RAID. And so that did land, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago now. And so there is, that's the last thing now to get D-RAID landed for the 0.8 release. So, it's been much longer than one we would have liked, but, hopefully we will see that out in a release in the near future. As far as Whamcloud's position, I mean, we're very keen to see that release out. That's definitely, a lot of interest around that. As far as our customer base go, while, DDN's Lustre solutions have traditionally been primarily on LDiskFS, DDN have had in recent years a ZFS offering as well, and I believe, I think it's in the public domain, but there's a large deployment that's one of those deployments that is out there now, and we definitely working with other partners. Again, some of our partners prefer LDiskFS and others very much in the ZFS camp. So definitely we expect to be catering for both segments for the foreseeable future. Is that what you were looking for, or is there anything else specific you wondered?
Nope, that's great. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Peter, this is Sarp. Do you have an expectation on which Lustre release we might see D-RAID solution?
So it's going to be, I mean, this is the thing, we're reliant on the underlying file system, which is, ZFS on Linux. So we're aiming for 2.12 to be ZFS 0.8 ready. And so, it may be that the release comes out very soon. I think in all likelihood, we'll see the same thing. I mean, we had this with 2.10, right? That we knew there was a lot of really useful work in ZFS 0.7, and 2.10 came out, 2 weeks before ZFS 0.7. So we shipped by default with 0.65 something or other, but it was still possible to build that version. 2.10.0 could be built with ZFS 0.7. So those who want, after the fact, you could still go back and use that. or, if there was in the case of 2.10, that became a maintenance release stream. And so we had, 2.10.1 then supported 0.71 or something out of the box. So we could well see a similar scenario that we'd have, a 0.7.10 or something would be the version that 2.12 ships with, but it would still be possible when 0.8 is available to build and use it. We'll definitely, of course, and while 0.8 is a moving target, that's still possible that something else changes and there'll be an extra patch needed, but I think it will be some small, well-defined change that would be needed to make 2.12 work with 0.8. And we'll obviously switch master to work with the latest and greatest as soon as, that's out there as a full release. Is that what we're looking for, Sat?
Yeah, so 2.12 and onwards.
Yeah, it's going to be tight for 2.12, but definitely, into 2019, I expect there will be, 0.8 will be become the default shipping version of ZFS. And there'll still be people who might want to use the older version for whatever reason, but 0.8, I would imagine we're getting to that close enough that it's going to be available in that time frame.
Awesome, thank you. Again, for the attendees on the call, if you have a question, if you attended late and missed a message, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type it into chat window, just like Peter Bojanic did, and I can mute you. So what other question? We have DDN here to answer all your questions.
Hey, Sarp, this is Nate Schumann from Cray. Thank you again. Can you hear me first?
Yes.
Yep.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Great. Thank you. So thanks for hosting this webinar, and congratulations. I second Peter's congratulations to the Whamcloud team. I think we're, from a Cray perspective, we're pretty excited to see this transition, and for me, I'm actually pretty excited to see where some Whamcloud's priorities are going, especially in terms of Lustre usability, looking to deploy more on Flash analytics and enterprise. And I'm curious, are these plans that are going to be kind of coming out to the community, and are you looking to augment and add to the Whamcloud resources in order to push these priorities further?
So, I mean, we're definitely, compared to the resources we had at Intel, like with the combined efforts and, just out of the box, we've already got extended resources going into these efforts. And so, yes, like all of those are just sort of high level focus areas. And then in terms of how that relates to, what specifics under those umbrellas are we doing? We have been going through a more detailed planning exercise and staffing and looking at where we do need to augment our resources versus, just use existing resources already at our disposal. And so, yeah, we're really gearing up for supercomputing to talk about a lot more detail around that. But just at the moment, just to give a broad brushstrokes of, the things that we're focusing on.
Okay.
I have a question. This is for both Cray and DDN. Do you guys talk to each other? Or these events, OpenSFS events like these, are the chances where you communicate?
Well, I can answer that on an engineering level, and we talk all the time. So last week, the part of the LAD event, there was a developer day, and certainly DDN and Cray were the most strongly represented organizations there, and there was a lot of good, technical discussions about different approaches on some of the development going on. And definitely Cray is a regular participant on the LWG. So those are regular touch points that we just routinely have.
Awesome.
Beyond that, I mean, Robert, if you want to talk to the sort of broader sort of organizational level discussions, I know you chat to Pete Ongaro regularly, but beyond that, how would you characterize things?
Right. So, I mean, I would add to that certainly the ambition on this side is on the vendor sort of developer side to coordinate more rather than less, both with respect to Cray, which is of course the major other company that has a development investment here, as well as a bit less relevant for the US, Fujitsu in Asia, that also has a fairly large investment from a development perspective. So, I think we recognize that a parallel file system with all the bits and pieces to it, and trying to make that thing a bit more usable and a bit more attractive to a broader user community will require many resources, and the more we coordinate, I think the better the output will be. Now there are, as Peter said, there are the developer workshops, which is part of a mechanism, but I think we'll also have sort of a more regular dialogue at the management level to make sure that the priorities on all sides are understood, and that we do not do what has partly happened in the past, for example with Fujitsu, that there is a lot of duplication of effort. So I think we really do want to avoid that and coordinate in the best way we can.
That's very good to hear. Again, we are in the business for providing a healthy Lustre community. So if there's anything OpenSFS can do to improve the communications between the vendors, if it's needed, there's anything needed from our side, please let us know. Cray, Fujitsu, DDN, whoever is on the call or not on the call, please let us know. This is our business. We want to help you so you can help the community. So I'm glad we are getting these questions. I'm glad we are providing this platform today at this moment. Those questions can be asked and answered, but please let us know if there's anything else we should be doing. Any other questions? I'm looking at the chat window and I don't see any other questions, but I see people are unmuting themselves. Not gonna put people on spotlight, but any other questions? Okay. Well, there's one. Peter.
Yeah, sure. I can just
go ahead.
So as we're and so I would also I would echo what Peter Jones was saying. We that our developers and architects talk at the various forums and so forth. We also have really good engagement, even right at the very grassroots level in Jira interactions and so forth. But that got me to thinking, as we're getting close to releasing our next version of Cluster Store, and we're stabilizing things in Lustre, we find perhaps different defects in our environments than other customers might have found before. And so I just wanted to make sure that we understood the best way for us to coordinate on really tricky defects, things that are tough but impactful, like data corruption and
right.
So forth.
Yeah, I mean, it has always been a bit challenging. Your team historically, particularly because you had such a different tree that was based on a much older version with, much of the same patches taken from the community tree, but just integrate in different order, but other changes as well. It's always been a bit challenging to sort of pick through and see what the relevance is in the community context, right? And whether it's an issue of something that's very contextual to the, to your specific tree versus, relevant for those who are using the version. So I think, I know that you've made great strides in recent times to sort of eliminate that delta. And so now you're fairly current with your current version is based on 2.11, right? Whereas, rather than a much older version. I definitely think that the closer you get to, if you're aligned with the community version and that question is out of the way, I think we're much, your organizational goals are like closely aligned with the community goals if there are serious issues like that. So of course, everyone is, has a vested interest in quickly finding a solution to these issues. So I think we're stepping in that direction. And, I know there have been a couple of issues you found in your 2.11 testing, which, we have flagged for 2.12 and, are things that we would need to get sorted out in the coming weeks to finalize that release.
And what is the best way, Peter, for us to coordinate on those details?
So, we use the LWG, right? So as long as there's tickets are open in JIRA with the details around the issue, and then, we have every LWG meeting is a standing agenda item to talk about, important issues or any other things that have come up. So that would be the forum I would expect those to come up in.
Okay, cool. I think that's a good answer. Thank you.
So Peter, or both Peter, so one additional notion here. So on the DDN side, we have so we also had sort of the separate DDN branch that had backports, etc. What we want to do in future on the DDN side is essentially eventually have just one release, which is a Whamcloud release, rather than have the open source tree Whamcloud release and then a branch of that's the DDN release. So we want. So that means, of course, that the sort of the master branch is has the maximum number of patches, has the maximum number of defects solved, etc. So that's kind of the direction that I believe is the right direction given the maturity of the file system. And I think it is something that is becoming doable. So I would encourage everybody else sort of to help us in that direction, so that in the end there is essentially one tree with really minor versions, and we'll stick all to that. Again, that's an ambition. We're not quite there yet, but I think that's the right direction for this community.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Robert. I think Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say our push to move to 2.11 is essentially aligning with that goal, Robert. For us to be able to progress our roadmap for customers, and to get some of our what we want to bring out in terms of features. That's exactly the path that we're taking right now. So everything that we're doing is landing up in master as fast as we can push it up, and we're clearly in line with that desire, and I think that's actually where we're at today.
I appreciate that.
I'll take that one step further and say that yes, Cray is making a big investment to get all the way from Lustre 2.7 to 2.11 for our next major release, and that to best take advantage of that investment is going to be to collaborate on the tip of the tree. So I think that from a number of different perspectives, that's in our definite shared interest.
Good.
Excellent.
Are there any other questions?
Question about support. What do you think about support model? We support ourselves, but sometimes management asks questions. Can we purchase support, like in case of complex issues?
Well,
right. Peter, maybe you want to answer that.
well, yes, I hope people do, because that's what our business unit's funded by. Yeah, I mean, mostly we work through, with partners who, do the direct customer support, but we do work with a number of, larger sites where they have good expertise and, provide direct support to them. So yes is the answer. We're still offering that business, and we have a Salesforce, a Whamcloud Salesforce that's focused on just that kind of business. So I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch, but if you email sales@whamcloud.com, somebody could help answer your questions around that.
Thanks.
Any other questions? So if there are no other questions, I would like to conclude this webinar, but first I would like to extend my thanks once again for Ken Rawlings for putting this together. So Ken, thank you very much. You have gone through quite a lot of pain putting this together, but in the end, turns out to be you did a great thing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarp, and thanks to you and to everyone else for making this such a successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I would like to thank Robert and Peter from DDN for joining and patiently answering our questions. Thank you guys for doing this. It has been a benefit to the community and OpenSFS. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And finally, thanks to everyone. At one point, I was reading 35 participants in this webinar. So thank you all for joining. I hope it was useful to you. And again, if you have any questions, you can shoot them at OpenSFS, or you can directly target DDN with your questions. So thank you all. Thanks a lot. And that concludes our webinar today. At this point, I'm stopping the recording.